And welcome to The Bottom Line, where we break down the most pressing business and economic stories of the day. This morning, Statistics Poland released the country's second quarter GDP and inflation results. Inflation figures didn't take us by surprise, but given recent analysis and forecasts, GDP did. On a day like this, it's great to have Ignacy Morawski, economist at Puls Biznesu, here to tell us more. Good afternoon, thank you, and welcome back.
Hello, good afternoon.
So you've been walking us through the state of the Polish economy on your recent visits to our studio. The run-up had mixed signals and the mood was also a little bit more skeptical. Can you tell us about today's results? Can you break them down for us?
So we have GDP growth at 3.2%. It's high. Or to use another word, it's normal. So the average growth in Poland over the last 15 years was around 3.4%. So we are very close to the historical average, which means that the economy is extremely normal. There's nothing excessive, right? We don't have any recession or any boom in the economy. And this is positive because if we look at the circumstances, environment in which the economy operates, it is clearly difficult. So external environment is difficult because GDP growth in Germany is still around zero. In the European Union, on average, it is slightly positive, but way below long-term average. So Poland certainly has surprised positively. However, I would say that these figures, 3.2, paint a bit too optimistic image of the economy, comparing to, I would say, the average situation of businesses and consumers. I think in general, economy is fine, it's okay, but it is not as in as good shape as these numbers indicate. Why? Part of GDP figures is public consumption, right? So public consumption is education, healthcare, administration. And GDP in public services is counted through wages, right? So for example, if we ask how much the value of educational services of a teacher are worth, and they are calculated as a function of his or her wage. So because of the fact that we've had a hike of public sector wages in the first half of the year, a substantial hike, because teachers got 30% hike, and average, I would say, administration workers got 20% hike. So it means that the value of public consumption went up. So I would say that it might have a bit artificially pumped up GDP figures. So maybe the image of the economy is not as optimistic as those data suggest. But in general, I would say that economy is fine.
You've raised a few interesting points there. So would you suggest that the outlook is a little bit too optimistic, and perhaps is this figure a little bit warped?
Yeah, if we look at we have not seen the details yet, because the statistical office published only the general GDP figure. We do not know the composition, so exports, investment, consumption. But what we see from monthly figures published, for example, by the central bank, is that the exports is falling, both of goods and services. And this is negative because Polish economy is so-called a small open economy, right? So it is very dependent on foreign demand. And when we observe falling exports, it means that the main driver of growth struggles to keep going, right? So this is I would say, the main point of cautiousness, of my cautiousness when I look at the economy. On the other hand, we have strong consumption, domestic consumption. And consumption is driven mainly by two factors. First, wages are growing. And as I said, we've seen wage hikes in administration, in education. So we've had the government pushing up consumption this year. But on the other hand, the external demand is weak. So my view is that if we want to have a long-term growth in Poland above 3%, and I would say our ambition is to have growth between 3.5% and 4%. That will be good. So if we want to achieve a growth at 3.5 to 4%, we we have to achieve higher growth in exports and investments. So those two engines that are still turned off today. Today, the economy is operating mainly thanks to higher consumption. So this is the factor that keeps me a bit cautious. I'm not negative. My approach to economy, my view is not negative. I'm just reluctant to be very optimistic.
So on the export front, how do we boost that in light of what is happening in Germany and what is happening in the economies of our neighbors? Because those results were a little bit worrying, to say the least.
Well, we cannot do anything on our own to increase demand in Germany or France or Italy or China. So we have to wait until central banks in the Western world, especially European Central Bank, cut interest rates. And that would be a very positive factor because European consumers, Western European consumers, do not want to spend money on durable goods like furniture, home appliances, and Poland is a very large producer of those kinds of goods. So the demand in Western Europe is weak, and it is weak, among other factors, due to high real interest rates. So consumers prefer to save money than to spend money on big items. And when central banks, like European Central Bank, cut interest rates, and I hope they will do it in the next couple of quarters, then we can hope that the consumer demand in Western Europe will pick up. And that should help Polish exports. On the other hand, what can we do here? I think one of the factors that make exporters struggle is a strong currency. So real effective exchange rate, which is both nominal exchange rate, the zloty exchange rate to euro, corrected for wage growth. So the real exchange rate is very strong. And that is a problem for exporters. So what we could do, I think, is that we could maybe cut interest rates here in Poland to make zloty weaken a bit. However, the pros and cons of such a move are not obvious because inflation is still pretty high in Poland. So the case for interest rate cuts is not extremely strong. I would be in favor, but most economists are probably against interest rate cuts in Poland due to high inflation.
I wanted to pick your brains about something that Ludwik Kotecki spoke about yesterday. He said that interest rates would need to be cut. If overall Poland's GDP growth would be under 3%, so if the interest rates would need to be cut in Poland, if in Q1 2025 the GDP growth would be under 3%. So at the moment it's assessed at 3.2, but we've got 2 more quarters to go. Yeah. So this doesn't necessarily predetermine the annual result yet. How far should those cuts go? Should they go? Could they go? And overall, this hawkish monetary policy, how should it be adapted given the current rate?
Well, given today's GDP figures, the chances that GDP growth will be below 3% at the beginning of next year are certainly lower than they were yesterday, right? So today's GDP figures for the second quarter of this year have an impact on forecast for GDP in the first quarter of the next year. So if Monetary Policy Council thinking is that the threshold of 3% is important, I don't know whether other MPC members share the view of Ludwik Kotecki. I think that to some extent, yes. So if 3% growth is this threshold, then certainly the chances of interest rate cuts are not very high. So I think that in current environment, with growth at around 3% or 3.5%, Monetary Policy Council will not be willing to ease monetary policy, to cut interest rates, because they are still worried about inflation, about high wage growth, and they presume that the potential growth of the economy is around 3%. So if the actual growth rate is higher, they think that the economy is fine, so it doesn't need any stimulus. So we will see. My view is a bit different. I think that once the consumption increase, which is certainly government-driven, will fizzle out, we may struggle to grow at high rate because of the issues with exports, weak external markets, weak internal investments. So my view is that we could, I would say, maybe adjust interest rates. But this is, I'm not a member of the Monetary Policy Council. Okay. So my view is that we could help the economy, we could help investments through lower interest rates, but certainly central bank is more hawkish.
Okay, it's been great having you in the studio on a day like this. I'm sure we'll have you back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And that was Ignacy Morawski, economist at Puls Biznesu. Thank you very much for joining us on Business Arena. I was your host, Marie Cato. Join us again tomorrow at 5 p.m. on TVP World. For more business stories, check us out on X and on tvpworld.com. But don't go away. Coming up next, World Talks. Goodbye.